Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Peter Wu, and I am the moderator for tonight's webinar. On behalf of HKIUD, I would like to welcome everyone in joining our webinar tonight. Tonight's webinar is part of a series of webinars hosted by HKIUD's International and Mainland Affairs Committee, in providing a platform for professionals around the world to share information on urban design topics and issues. And tonight's topic will be on border urbanism, exploring border issues in urbanism discourse, presented by Dr. Quazi, Mahtab, Zaman. Dr. Zaman has been teaching architecture and urban design at Sutherland School of Architecture and Built Environment of the Robert Gordon University since 2008. His research and teaching center on the subject of urban design and architectural manifestation in urban contexts, focusing on new urbanism, regionalism, and regenerations, vertical urbanism, and much more. So here's tonight's schedule. So we'll have Dr. Zaman for his presentations. It will take about 30 minutes and followed by Q&A sessions. So enough for the introduction. I'll hand it over to Dr. Zaman.
The sections one, the rationale behind taking the border in urbanism discourse as a matter of interest, because as an architect and urban designer, we have scope to study border, and that is what we started to explore. And in the middle, we would try to kind of link the theory behind border and theory behind urbanism and how actually connect. And the third part will be what we have done so far and how we can actually proceed with the exploration and study more in a deeper sense of how border is changing and has changed our life, spatial order, and us habitat. So if you can see the second slide, that although we see the shape of our world as a one entity, but we are divided. We are divided and we are moving to more divisions. And that is the nature of socio-political, economic reasons. And there were 7 significant border, and we moved to more disintegration into 77 border since World War II, and still keeping on divisions, more separation. But this is not something new, or it is not giving us any solution, but we have to kind of take this border and study more into the social spatial conditions. So border as a geographical demarcation are seen as a kind of length of divisions, either physical or natural or man-made, and that is the nature of how we define our territory. And these are some of the typological borders. Some are soft, some are very thick, some are hard, and that is kind of depending on how both sides of the border are balancing. For example, one country has more economic power than the neighboring country, and the border becomes more thicker, more harder, and that resembles the European Union, and some of the countries are free to move. So we are connected now in terms of the network, digital world. As we see now, we are connected from different parts of the world and in one platform. but we are divided physically, and we are restricted in terms of movement, and we create more migrant and more threats to the social spatial life. So the conflicts, border provokes conflicts, mobility, displacement, war, negotiation, and so many issues. So the hard border, soft border, that changes in time and in terms of how the economy, politics, and society behaves. We have seen, or we are still seeing, the violent borders that creates refugees. And we also see the urges from the new generation with the question of why the border separates us and they. The social displacement creates the risk and the spatial ambiguity, what kind of processes this social displacement happens. For example, the space of origin and in between the movement and the destination are all ambiguous for the people who are actually moving through the process. And there is an interest from urbanism how to construct those spatial process and how the social displacement happens through this spatial order. We have always been nomads in terms of moving with seasons, moving from the place of interest to the new places of interest for the economy, for the betterment of life, but how we see ourselves in the new conditions, which is a matter of scrutiny. The border is a line of divisions, but they are not a physical line. They represent the code of the religious conflicts, class, race, resources, and they produce the condition with which the movement happens. So border issues are found as socio-political debates in postmodernism, cultural studies, post-colonialism, and ethnic studies frame within the production of space those who know the l'alphabet, and some are as popular as high cultures, which is exclusively for the postmodern and ethnic studies. So there are emerging line of knowledge, rethinking borders by John and political materialities of borders by Olka, and the Raymond Williams study, who was a Welsh, and the divisions between Welsh and England, views beyond the border. So we see that as a sources of information to think about what can be done from the discourse of architecture and urban design. We cannot delve so many things about the political and sociology, because we take it for granted that the divisions are happening, but we need to study what these divisions inform us in terms of socio-spatial fragmentation and the changes happening. So we found after several years of kind of discussion since 2016, we thought that, okay, we need to kind of learn more about from the point of interdisciplinary, because border is an interdisciplinary and urbanism is also interdisciplinary. So we thought that, okay, well, let's see through the lens of interdisciplinary, because architecture and urban design cannot alone deal with this issue. So we kind of focused on some of the issues. For example, the characteristics of social displacement at the border, transient temporal settlement, typologies and form of this settlement, conflict and cultural hybridity, the architecture of weak forms on borderlands or borderlines, regenerative architecture as a socio-cultural policy, a phenomenology of generic places, the occupation of place between reality and authorities, crisis communication and the architecture of media, quick solution, the printed habitat, new social formation and social capital at the new displaced area. So we had the first get together. We call it not a conference, just kind of thinking about what shall we do with this issue in 2018 in Aberdeen, Scotland, with 15 country participants, with 29 paper. And we based on the study of Duranty, which captures most of the border typology through Hypothetica. And that was back in early 19th century as a hypothesis of how we can capture most of the typology. And also the student engagement, since being an academia, we kind of engaged students to look for some of the issues that border. For example, the top one, we see China is kind of making all the products and connected to the world in terms of the goods and services, and that is very pragmatic. And it is not only one way; it is also China is actually receiving resources. We see the micro communal places like the Chinatown as a micro border. Also, we studied the different typology, the internet as a borderless society, and the socio-cultural divisions by different social issues. Even border is not a national or regional border. We have seen the neighborhood border with marginalization because of the socioeconomic conditions. So the second border, the following year, 2019, we went to Malaga in Spain with the discussion, with the intention of discussion, the more border within border, the issues of fragmentation, disposition, and connections. And we are moving next year, 2024, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with the intention of using technology in border research. Technology solve the fragmented habitat at the borderland, how technology can actually give us more accurate information on the mobility, reasons for movement. We have successfully done a few publications, the Border Urbanism Interdisciplinary Discourse book, and we also looked at how we can theorize social fear through the space, the spatial transition, and how social fear goes through different oscillation. Although this is not something very prominent in the study of urban design or urbanism, but social fear in terms of its social meaning and the psychic meaning of different spaces, we know from Camille Lynch and Richard Sennett. So the book one is out in the market. So this captures 30 different discussion through global authors from different perception, interpretation as a matter of transdisciplinary perspective. So we looked at the socially, economically, politically, historical influence on the neighborhoods, the spatial formation, new spatial formation, and the typology of those spaces. So the book one has all the information if you can get hold of the book. This gives us, as a planner, designer, architects, environmental engineers, anthropologists, political science, people can actually have some kind of inspiration. So we have the second book upcoming soon. And also we have a website between USA, Hungary, India, Singapore, Pakistan, Ireland, Canada. So it's growing every month, and we are looking at the possibility of getting that into more interdisciplinary, like architecture, whether architecture can actually think about the border issues. We are connected to Todd Miller, who is in United States, talking about the Mexico and USA border and its different trajectory of the hard and the soft border of Mexico and USA. And you can actually access the Border Chronicle, which informs various policies and various impact on the mobility. In UK, we are experiencing the Brexit and implication on the life, economy, urbanism, architecture. For example, the resource allocation has been hampered, supply chain, labor, materials are in a dire state, high cost on mobility, the labor shortage is making the design and construction difficult. So there is a duality of how the divisions can actually affect society, architecture, urbanism, and they are available in terms of information as a separate entity, but we are trying to kind of get this fragmented information and try to build the rationality of what divisions can give us in terms of the fragmented social spatial conditions. Emerging wars as a controlled delete architecture and producing social meaning of emptiness, because the new generation is finding very ambiguous and empty in terms of the spatial fragmentation. So there is no, the definition of spatial order has been transformed because of the war. And also we see the control V, the repetition of migration due to various reasons. One, the war, the climate change, and the interest from urbanism and architecture would be how they live in the new conditions and what can we do to understand better, and how urbanism and architecture and other interdisciplinary tools can actually solve the problem. The borderland is very pathetic in terms of the threshold they create life to grow. The displacement and explosion is happening as in political order. Also in other spectrum of the connectivity between New York and London for per se, which is a hypothetical connections which many countries and many theorists seek to believe that this is possible, and how it will be impacted on economy, interregional economy, and spatial order is a matter of study. So the fragile habitat which we see by makeshift settlement and how the life grows within that is a matter of study, and we are interested in focusing on that. Displacement with recently 15,000 children arrived in Europe from different parts is an alarming situation where the next generations will be in a very ambiguous, crippling spatial order with no meaning that we understand as a disciplined and for the social development. So it's a very important for the planner, architects, and urban designer to see how we can address the spatial order with justice. Architecture is not behind it. They are trying to kind of make some solutions through temporal habitat, like DZN has this picture, and the top is one that is not in spatial order that we try to kind of accept. These are the phenomena of the Hungary, the movement from a different Far East and making the threshold at the entry point to the Europe. The crisis is always there in terms of the new society, which at the borderland has, is it something that they will be taking as a positive for the development, mental development, but the divisions is always there and it will be there. We are not debating on whether the divisions will be taken out because for the balancing and the sustainability of the regional, international border should be there, but how the border would be creating different kinds of threshold and how we can actually deal. It's matter of interest from interdisciplinary, and that is what we are actually developing. The group and the Center of Border Urbanism is trying to focus in a more, not a silo, but in a more interdisciplinary way. And that is what we believe. And that is what my presentation ends with. And I'm actually interested to hear from you, those who are listening to me. Okay, thank you, Peter.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Zaman, on sharing and presentation to our audience and members. And we'll go straight into Q&A sections right now. So if anyone have any questions for Dr. Zaman or would like to share your thoughts on the topic of border urbanism, feel free to type in the chat box and I'll read it to Dr. Zaman one by one. So we have a couple of questions here. So let me start off with this. This is Caesar Canova from Brazil. Would like to suggest a question. How can we give a meaningful local cultural identities without creating borders?
Well, it's an interesting one because if you look at the borderland and the center of a country, the thinning out of cultural identity happens when you move towards the border. The border is a hybrid and gray area which thin out the cultural integrity. And because of its movement and threshold and the political threshold, the cultural integrity at the border diminishes. So how we can actually kind of act sensibly to create integrity at the border or the consequence of border is a very critical questions, because I think the hybridity of society and it's happening and it is inevitable that it is happening. The mobility and the transformation and its cultural identity is a natural process. And if we look at the history, where we came from and how we process our cultural identity, it's a very difficult to answer in one sentence, it is happening and it will happen. The hybridity of the cultural, which is, if you look at the media culture, it's kind of making us homogeneous in terms of understanding of the culture. But within that, we are trying to kind of make necessary intervention to keep our cultural identity. There is no straightforward answer, Caesar.
Okay, so we have another questions from issues highlighted are all geopolitical, social, policy, and economic issues. What about border urbanism? The actual spaces along the line of controls. Are there any transformative projects as a benchmark?
There are various transformative projects which is at the hypothetical stages. For example, Harvard GSD has done, if you look at this picture, can actually inform some of the negotiation of the demarcation. And if you search the GSD border project, they made cultural ties by creating some sort of play equipment so that the new generation on both sides can actually interact. There are, as I said, there are some form of intervention through architecture and urbanism to create a conducive environment at the borderland. And it's not so common trend as border is very significantly belong to political discourses. It's a growing area, it's a kind of emerging area, and there will be more and more people interested in the border because the border is in this century and in this decade is a very intense issue.
Okay. So another question from Caesar. These aspects make me think about border urbanism, also inside the cities. So many walls and in condominiums, fences, surveillance cameras here in Brazil. Would that topics be part of the discussion as well?
Well, I think depends on the thematic area of the conference, because it is true that the ghetto community of when it happens, why it emerges in the ghetto community because of insecurity, of the socio-economic disparity in one city or one nation. I think the divisions within the neighborhood is a function or outcome of this socio-economic disparity. And it is very interesting to learn how these spatial divisions happen and what is the implication in terms of the growth, the social growth and the social capital. Yes, I have no doubts that there will be more and more people will be interested in the micro level, how we are divided, even within the neighborhood.
Okay, so are there some clear urban design lessons from history? Do we keep making the same mistakes spatially?
In what sense? The mistake. Can you elaborate in a little bit of what we are meant to kind of keep away from the mistake?
I assume it's the mistake on the crisis.
Well, crisis is always at the forefront of everything. Crisis gives us solution, but crisis is a product of different imbalance. Crisis happens in every moment, every day, but the migrant crisis, the borderland crisis, the settlement crisis, the social crisis. It is part of life, and the solutions from professional are a matter of interest, whether it can be dealt. Well, as a separate economic instrument is there to kind of solve the economic crisis, but the urbanism sits in a very ambiguous situation, how we can embrace more and more discipline to understand better. The space can actually give a sense of belonging. Space can give us some kind of a social integrity. So there are ways we can actually bring border divisions into the discourse of urban design, architecture, and urbanism.
Okay, great. Another questions. It seems like border urbanism is highly linked to political. How can planning be effectively used to combat this?
Well, planning is a part of political policy oriented. So I'm not seeing planning is away from the socio-political instrument, because planning is an instrument which addresses political decisions. So border can be easily be dealt with planning and urban design and architecture. All the policies that planning produces, urban planning produces, are either meant to change the socio-economic conditions, or the socioeconomic conditions, new conditions can make different new policies. So they're connected very, very much.
Okay. So another questions. Northern Metropolis in Hong Kong is at the boundary area too, separating Hong Kong and Shenzhen. How should this area be developed, taking into account this border urbanism? Also, how you see border urbanism in the context of regional cooperation, regional planning?
Yes, I think the issue of Shenzhen and Hong Kong, which I understood being there for many years, but I think I don't know at the moment. But I think the saturation or homogeneity of two distinct socioeconomic conditions between Shenzhen and Hong Kong, the policy is to neutralize at the point where the mobility can be slowed down. The development at the fringe, at the border, is what that can neutralize the tension between two different economy. But it is again the knowledge of the urban planning, knowledge of architecture as an instrument to tackle socio-political differences. The Macau, the Zhuhai, Shenzhen, Hong Kong is going to be one time in a neutralized because of the development. Development as a tool will probably be removing the crisis.
Okay. So another question is about Hong Kong and Shenzhen. The border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen is a unique case study, where it's deliberately created by colonial legacy for more than 100 years. With the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, there's more efforts in integrating the two cities, which share the same history and roots. However, due to one country, two system, the border is still permanent tools to separate the two and keep both cities distinct in terms of government, financial, tax system, and so on. While interestingly, trying to integrate the two socially, economically, and culturally. My question is your second book looking at this urban, a unique urbanism between Hong Kong and Shenzhen under one country, two systems? If not, can I contribute a chapter or share some insights into this unique Asian border?
Yes. I think the first book had some issues between Malaysia, Singapore, and it was very interesting because most of the cooperation between Malaysia and Singapore happens through mobility of worker. There is a big issues between Shenzhen and Hong Kong in terms of the policy that 1997 happened. I was there in Hong Kong, and after that, the 50 years of the treaty to keep Hong Kong separate from rest of China will be a issue. I don't have the recent information, but it is a very much interesting for us to kind of explore. Yes, we welcome the article which can update our knowledge on what is happening as a one country, two system policy. I think I welcome that, and I will be happy to kind of receive your. But the second book, which is the collection of articles from the Spanish session, you are welcome to kind of send the article for the third book, which is the next year in Brazil. I will post it in HKIOD because we are still making progress on what focus would be in the third conference. But you're always welcome to keep us informed. The study of the China and Hong Kong is still fresh, and then we would be interested to hear from you. Thanks.
Okay. Let's see. About the settlements in borders, the imagined separation border gets very physical. It becomes a place. Should we start talking about borders between countries as 10 kilometers linear demarcations instead of an actual line?
Yes, we call it borderland. The borderland represents the neutral zone, or depends on the country and its relationship with the neighboring country. The borderland is always the container of displaced people, and there is a kind of interest for architecture to inform how that settlement can be developed as a middle ground of two nations. But it's always critical. But understanding the socio-cultural setting in the borderland is the first phase before we can actually think of how to design the settlement.
Okay. So this question is from Ian Foster. I come from Northern Ireland and can cross an invisible international border there into Ireland without realizing it. And I live in Hong Kong, and it takes me 1 hour to cross a border between my home and my office in Shenzhen, China. 2 hours wasted each day. Is it just politicians getting in the way? As urban designers, should we just do some public consultations and see what the people want? A wall or a bridge, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting condition, because as a person, you have been in the Republic of the division between Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Still, there are discussions going on due to Brexit. Well, the divisions are the decision from the political platform. I think the politics on the basis of how the economy will be performed is a matter of socioeconomic and political decisions. Yes, there are ways to solve it, and the urban planning can actually have some leverage on how the two kind of similar cultural and economic conditions can be mediated at the creative way at the border, and how Northern Ireland can. Well, I don't understand the future, but as a process of making the Brexit and its implication on Ireland and the Northern Ireland as a antidote to many problem between the resource allocation, resource movement, but we need to think about it. But Shenzhen and Hong Kong, which has some positive outcome from the development, because the Hong Kong, we can see Shenzhen is a second model of Hong Kong, and the power of economy is shaping two sides of the border, Shenzhen and Hong Kong, and many people are actually moving as a matter of daily basis, and then because of the stability of both sides. But we need to see how it progressed, the Irish border.
Okay, so in response to an earlier questions, the earlier questions was, are there some clear urban design lessons from the histories? We was actually trying to discuss the urban design issues spatially, not political issues. Are there some spatial lessons that can be applied?
Well, I think I agree, but also disagree, because the spatial manifestation is a socio-political and economic reasons, because any space we don't see as a space itself, as a physical entity. Any spatial order we see as a culmination of the socio-political divisions or socio-political decisions. Free economy has a different type of spatial configuration than the restricted economy. I think there is a correlation between politics and space, and we cannot disagree that.
Okay, great. So Quazi, do you have before we wrap up for the webinar tonight, do you have anything to wrap up before we go?
Right. First of all, I thank everybody who has attended from different parts of the world, especially Hong Kong, which is getting very, very dark. We are 12 o'clock, but I think the questions are very, very crucial and rational, and there will be more questions coming, because I think the border and its effects on socioeconomic, as we said, the production and its production of space will be affected by more divisions, more policy. We are at the 5th or 6th year of study, and we will be hoping to kind of move to more matured stage to understand and embrace more people into the center. The center is growing every month with the interest of looking at different issues. So we invite everybody to Sao Paulo next year, and I will have the details sent through HKIUD. It will be about technology and the border and the displacement. But there are many issues we can deal with, but we have to be very careful. We are moving with the position that we have, urban planning, urbanism, and architecture. We cannot stray away too much to other discipline, but it is true that we need to take information from politics, anthropology, social issues. We have to take those to kind of build our strength, and to whatever we do, we need to kind of rely on those statistics and data.
Okay. So if anyone have any more questions following this webinar, feel free to send us email at gba@hkiud.org. So thank you, Dr. Zaman, for the presentation tonight. And thanks everyone for joining the webinar. And we look forward to see everyone again in our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter.
Thank
and
you,
thank
everyone.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.